Subscribe because it's free.
The Galactic Council had seen countless species rise and fall. Empires that spanned thousands of systems had knelt before them. Their fleets dismantled, their leaders forced into servitude. Every civilization that dared resist was crushed beneath the weight of superior technology, endless resources, and millennia of dominance. Humanity, they believed, would be no different. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of authority where decisions shaped the fate of entire species. A dozen alien representatives sat on towering thrones. Their forms varied, some exoskeletal, others gelatinous, some towering, others hunched and venomous. They were ancient, powerful, and, above all, confident. The Supreme Chancellor's voice echoed across the hall, his tone carrying the finality of a death sentence. Humanity, your defiance is futile. Your species will submit to the will of the galactic hegemony or face annihilation. The lone human representative stood unfazed, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp. Ambassador Elias Carter was no stranger to these displays of authority, but he also understood something the Council did not. Humanity did not break, and if we refuse... A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber. The amphibian-like Chancellor leaned forward. Then Earth will burn. Your colonies will be stripped of all value. The survivors, if any remain, will be scattered among the lowest castes, unrecognizable as the species you once were. Laughter, guttural and inhuman, filled the air. To them, this was a formality. The Council had delivered similar ultimatums for centuries, and the results had never deviated. The resistance would last weeks, months at best. Then humanity would crumble as all had before. Carter let the silence stretch, his gaze steady. You assume we will kneel. He tilted his head slightly. You assume wrong. The Chancellor's amusement flickered. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Human. Oh, I think we do, Carter replied. The question is, do you? The Council members bristled at the insolence. An avian delegate clicked its beak sharply. Your kind is reckless. This is your final warning. Carter exhaled through his nose, something close to a smile playing at the edges of his lips. He reached into his coat, causing tension to spike, and pulled out a simple data pad. This contains humanity's official response. He tapped the screen, and the message was transmitted to every council leader in the room. Confusion spread as they read it. The Chancellor's gaze darkened. This is madness. No, Carter corrected, turning toward the exit. This is war. He strode out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The great Galactic Council, the overlords of the stars, had been challenged, not with diplomacy, not with negotiations, but with defiance. It was something they were wholly unprepared for. Whispers erupted among the delegates. Some sneered, calling it the desperation of a doomed race. Others, the wiser ones, felt something else creeping into their minds, an emotion they had long forgotten. Doubt. The Chancellor recovered first, his voice regaining its weight. If they wished to be eradicated, so be it. He turned to his generals, the finest tacticians of 1,000 wars. Mobilize the fleets. Earth falls within the cycle. They bowed unquestioning. The Council had spoken. The war was already over, or so they thought. The invasion of Earth was supposed to be a formality. The Galactic Council had done this 1,000 times before. Deploy overwhelming force, cripple infrastructure, and accept surrender. It had never failed. Until now, their armada arrived in human space, a vast wall of warships that blotted out the stars, flagships the size of cities, dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, fleets of carriers unleashing fighter swarms. They expected resistance, but nothing beyond a desperate last stand on an inferior race. Then the first ships started disappearing. It began with supply convoys vanishing en route. No distress signals, no wreckage, just silence. The Council's admirals dismissed it as navigational errors, until an entire battle group failed to report in. Patrols sent to investigate never returned. Behind the scenes, humanity had already rewritten the rules of war. While the Council prepared for a conventional battle, human forces struck from the shadows. Cyber warfare units infiltrated enemy networks, feeding false coordinates, shutting down targeting systems, and rerouting Council reinforcements into deep space. Orbital defense platforms, presumed inoperable, came online in an instant, unleashing coordinated missile barges at precise weak points in the enemy formation. The first wave of the invasion fleet never even reached Earth's atmosphere. The Council adjusted, deploying ground forces to planetary colonies. Again, they expected a simple victory. Again, they were wrong. Humanity did not fight like the others. There were no neat formations, no honorable engagements. Council soldiers, genetically engineered, armored in advanced combat exosuits, marched onto colony worlds expecting swift conquests. What they found was hell. Cities were abandoned, eerily silent. Then, the first squad started disappearing. Entire platoons were found dismembered, their armor peeled open with brutal efficiency. Elite warriors, bred for battle, reduced to corpses in the dark. Guerrilla warfare became the Council's nightmare. Human strike teams emerged from nowhere, ambushing patrols before vanishing into the ruins. Roads were booby-trapped, supply lines cut, communication hubs hacked. They had overwhelming numbers, superior technology, but none of it mattered. Every time the Council adapted, humanity was already 10 steps ahead. Unmanned drones struck high-value targets with surgical precision. Electromagnetic pulses crippled their vehicles in the middle of engagements. Council commanders quickly realized they weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting ghosts. Then came the assassinations. Council officers, once untouchable, began dying in their own war rooms. Fleet admirals were found slumped over control panels, single bullet wounds in their skulls from snipers firing beyond visual range. The chain of command fractured. Confusion spread. The Council had never faced an enemy like this before. Panic crept in. Their forces had expected swift conquest, but now they spoke in hushed tones, fearing the shadows. They were the superior force. But in the darkness, in the ruins of fallen cities, that superiority meant nothing. A Council general, overseeing the invasion, sent an urgent message to the High Command. His voice trembled. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting something else. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council knew fear. And for the first time in history, they were losing. The war was supposed to be over by now. Instead, the Galactic Council was unraveling. What had begun as a campaign of domination had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. The fleets that once blackened the skies were now scattered and broken. Their once invincible armies were reduced to shattered battalions, operating in isolated pockets, cut off from supply lines. Their war machines, superior in every way on paper, lay abandoned in the ruins of human colonies, stripped, repurposed, or left to rust as grim reminders that technology alone did not decide war. The Council's finest strategists were dead, their war plans obsolete. They had underestimated humanity's adaptability, its sheer refusal to die. Every species they had ever conquered had folded when faced with overwhelming might. But humanity had adapted, it had learned, and now it was hunting them. The breaking point came at Proxima Centauri. The Council's High Command assembled their largest remaining fleet, tens of thousands of warships, an armada that spanned entire light years. If they could wipe out humanity's forces in one decisive battle, they could still salvage control of the war. Every available dreadnought, every last reserve ship, every mercenary force was mobilized. The Council forces arrived in system, expecting to catch humanity on the defensive. Instead, they found silence. No defensive formations. No planetary shields active. Just the cold glow of distant stars. Then the first ship exploded. It wasn't from enemy fire. It was torn apart by something unseen. Then another ship imploded, vanishing into a pinprick of darkness. Panic spread. The Council's admirals screamed for answers. That was when the message came through. One chilling sentence broadcast across all channels. You should have left us alone. The battlefield erupted. Humanity had done the impossible. They had developed a weapon that defied physics itself, microsingularity warheads. Instead of traditional bombardments, the Council ships were being erased from existence. The dreadnoughts, the battlecruisers, the pride of the Galactic Council's navy, swallowed whole by the very void they had once ruled. The Council's fleet commanders had no countermeasure. Their formations shattered. Officers abandoned their posts. Ships turned to flee, only to be intercepted by human strike forces. Smaller, faster vessels weaving between the chaos, surgically dismantling what remained. Then came the ground assault. Elite human operatives, wearing advanced exo-rigs powered by stolen and enhanced alien tech, descended onto the Council's command bases. They weren't there for territory. They were there to eliminate leadership. Council warlords, once untouchable, were dragged from their bunkers. Some fought, some begged, none survived. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council had no plan, no counterattack, no escape. The war was no longer about conquest. It was about survival, and humanity was giving them none. The whispers began. Among the remaining species of the Council, among the soldiers still fighting, among the admirals still alive, the unthinkable, surrender. But surrender was not an option. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. It was fighting to end the war on its terms. And it was not done yet. The war was no longer a battle for dominance. It was a reckoning. The Galactic Council, once the ultimate authority in the known universe, was collapsing. What had begun as an effort to subjugate humanity had turned into their greatest nightmare. Human fleets, once outnumbered and outgunned, now dictated the war. Council strongholds, which had stood for millennia, fell one by one. The remnants of their mighty armadas drifted as wreckage in the void. The species that had ruled the galaxy for ages were no longer fighting for victory. They were fighting to escape, but there was nowhere left to run. Humanity's final offensive targeted the heart of the Council, their core world, the place from which they had ruled for centuries. A planet thought to be untouchable, protected by defenses that had never been breached. Until now, human warships emerged from slip space in perfect formation. Unlike the chaos of past battles, there was no desperation, no imbalance of power. This time, it was humanity that held overwhelming force. The once great fleets of the Council barely managed a response before bombardment began. Orbital defenses were obliterated in minutes. The Council's elite guards, warriors who had never known defeat, were slaughtered before they could even organize a defense. Human drop pods rained down like falling stars, bringing with them the soldiers who had spent years fighting a war they never asked for. Inside the Council chambers, panic ruled. The Supreme Chancellor, the voice of the Council, stood among the remaining delegates. Gone was the arrogance, the certainty of victory. The creatures that had mocked humanity now shook in fear. Every attempt to negotiate was met with silence. Every desperate plea for surrender was ignored, because this was never about surrender. The Council had made a mistake. They had believed that fear ruled the galaxy, that power alone dictated survival. But humanity had shown them something else, something they could not comprehend: the will to fight, the refusal to kneel, the understanding that war was not just about weapons or numbers. It was about resolve, and humanity's resolve was unbreakable. The last line of defense fell, and the great Council chamber doors were blown apart. Smoke and fire filled the air as armored human soldiers marched in. The Supreme Chancellor, the ruler of 1,000 species, stood frozen as the lead soldier approached. His voice, once mighty, now trembled. "You don't have to do this," he pleaded. The soldier stared at him, expression unreadable behind his visor. The response was quiet, but final. "We already did." The gunshot echoed through the ruined chamber. Across the galaxy, the news spread. The Council was no more. The rulers of the stars had fallen, and in their place stood humanity, not as conquerors, not as tyrants, but as something far more terrifying. A force that had been underestimated, a force that had been threatened, a force that had struck back. And now, the galaxy would never forget.